These chips and dings, courtesy of Typhoon Mawar, mean that our loss is your gain. Get up to $10,000 off your favorite models, plus no money down. Inventory is going fast, so stop by the Nissan Guam showroom, take a test drive, or get pre-qualified for financing at nissanguam.com today. On approved credit, see Nissan Guam for details. BK's turning up the heat with the new fiery chicken nuggets. Our all-white meat chicken nuggets, cooked golden brown and coated with a spicy glaze made from black pepper, bird's eye chili, and a touch of cayenne pepper. Available in an 8-piece combo meal. Top off your meal with our new Kickin' Mango frozen drinks with a sizzle of chili. BK's fiery chicken nuggets and Kickin' Mango frozen drink. Now available for a limited time only at participating locations. BK, you rule.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Jose, I've been saying that for 5 years.
Yes, sir.
And I'm going to keep on saying it.
I hope you don't stop.
Today is the first day of the 6th year. You know, I went to the block party down at the Paseo on Saturday. It was a little bit embarrassing because no matter I went, there'd be tailgaters hollering at me, 5 more years, 5 more. But I appreciate it.
And I heard Governor Lou Yongero said, I didn't get 5 years.
Yeah.
She got 8.
And she probably doesn't understand how grateful we are.
Exactly.
That she didn't. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start out here with Zemi Ikotni, such as it is, although it's not real Zemi Ikotni. It's a piece that I grabbed from Tom Knighton's column called Bearing Arms. But it kind of has an op-ed dimension because, you know, one of the things that we do here on Tall Tales is we look at the media and the way they report things and the way so often things are framed so that the reader thinks he's reading something that's straightforward, neutral, and factual. But actually it's shaped in such a manner that the reader has to really have some resistance or he's read to an erroneous conclusion. You know what I mean, Jose? And I'm spotting that all the time if I can, and I know you do too. So here's an article that ran a couple days ago by Tom Knighton. Gun control surveys about shaping opinion, not finding it. How many times have we seen a poll roll out finding that gun control is popular with the people? We've seen it 1,000 times at least. I don't really even know if that's an exaggeration at this point. It's pretty common. Yet we also see cases like in Maine, where despite polling saying the measure was popular, it was soundly defeated by the voters. That's because the 2-second-long question doesn't exactly capture the nuance of a whole bill. It would seem to suggest that gun control's popularity isn't quite its billed as. However, writing over at the Federalist, John Lott argues that the purpose of those surveys isn't to discover where the public stands. It's to shape public opinion itself. It's what's called in the trade a push poll. Would you vote for Jose Martinez if you knew that he was a dirty skunk and an honorary pig stealer? Oh, is Jose a dirty skunk and an honorary? I didn't know. Oh, well, for sure, I'm not going to vote for him.
I showered last week, Bob.
Gun control advocates often point to polls showing overwhelming support for gun control. For instance, in May, a headline for the NPR, that kind of tells you all you need to know, doesn't it? Proclaimed, quote, most Americans say curbing gun violence is more important than gun rights. That's what the NPR, National Public Radio. They can't be possibly anything but straight down the middle. And Americans say that curbing gun violence is more important than gun rights. We don't need no Second Amendment, they're saying. But is that really the choice of Americans face on gun control? The survey asked, do you think it's more important to control gun violence or to protect gun rights? It found that American adults prefer reducing gun violence, 60%, over protecting gun rights, 38%. Besides extensive reporting on the poll by NPR and PBS, the survey received massive news coverage in such outlets as USA Today and The Hill, with headlines echoing NPR's. USA Today, yeah, it's not a state-run newspaper, but you can hardly tell.
Might as well be.
Yeah. The problem is, however, that while the media label gun control opponents as supporting safety and wanting to reduce violence, people on both sides of the gun control debate advocate such things. Gun rights do not inherently imply gun violence. Indeed, such violence can be curbed by protecting the right of people to defend themselves against it. Lott then goes on to cite concrete examples where polling was conducted asking about the same issues, but reframing the question just a bit. In every case, people were more likely to favor the pro-gun argument than previously reported. They weren't overwhelmingly pro-gun in every instance, but even when gun control argument came out on top, the difference was much narrower than it had been. Lott continues, quote, organizations such as NPR and PBS spend our tax dollars on surveys that paint gun control in the best possible light. But clearly, small changes in the questions dramatically changed the polling results. That isn't just true in this case. It also goes for surveys on specific gun control proposals, such as red flag laws and so-called universal background checks. Now, for the sake of argument, I suppose it's possible these are good faith differences of opinion and how to frame the questions. Yeah, for sure. But I tend to doubt it. Polling is something people understand pretty well, so they know how important it is to ask questions in the correct way. But if you look at the questions being asked, they're pretty vague. Take universal background checks, for example. Do you support background checks for gun sales? Seems simple and straightforward. But many will read this question about whether you support the status quo. Do you support background checks on all gun transfers, including those between family members? Is a different question and isn't likely to get the same response. So it's difficult for me to accept the ideas that these are good faith differences in framing. No, they're likely intentional, which means our tax dollars are to some extent being used to try and strip us of our rights. Frankly, it's disgusting, especially since gun control advocates are doing all they can to stigmatize us and push us into the fringes of society. Even mentioning that you're not giving up your guns in a country song. is now cancel-worthy. What they also want to do is try to show that we're a smaller percentage of the population than we actually are, all in hopes that being marginalized will force us to change our opinions. If it's only you and Herman that feel that way. Everybody else is, yeah, really? And my story about the scandal underlying Brown versus Board of Education, they got it down to an 8-1 vote. And and Warren, Chief Justice Warren, thought it was extremely important that the decision be 9-0, that it be unanimous. So the one holdout had been pretty stringent right up until the time Warren said, Jackson came over. So now it's 8-1. You're all by yourself. Yeah, really? Okay, put me down for in favor. It's a powerful thing. Nobody wants to admit it, but nobody, it takes a rare individual to be the outlier, to stand up and say, I'm not going to do that. I don't care if everybody else does. It's wrong. And I have a feeling, Jose, that that's part of Trump's popularity, that people identify with Trump. And no, I don't care if you've always done it that way. It's not the right way to do it. It's not what a lot of the people want. I ain't going to do it. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So what the gun control folks want to do is to try to show that we're a smaller percentage of the population than we really are, all in hopes that being marginalized will force us to change our positions. Unfortunately for them, we see through this nonsense. All right, let's take a peek at the card and see what we've got on the card today. Of course, we start out with systemic racism and go from there to Laura Sauter. Sina Laura Sauter. She titles her column Chocho Sina. Now, for you uninitiated, Jose, the word chocho means work. Chocho. Machochocho, I am working. Machochojo, kneecap, I worked last night. Chocho, it's kind of the root that the rest of it's built around. So she calls her column Chocho Sina, meaning she is a very respected elder, and that column is her work, recognized by
hers indeed.
Laura Sauter. Yeah. So it's Laura Sauter versus 21 July 1944. Then we've got Bavakwa versus, quote, the culture, close quote. And then Calamity Jane versus youth. I put that in question mark. And then I've got candidacy versus dollars. The legislature versus the Fair Labor Standards Act. Anthony Camacho, counsel for the University of Guam, versus Doug. Candid versus Jim Moylan. Candid has written 2 articles about the junior member of the House from Alabama. You know who that is, Jose? The junior member of the House of Representatives from Alabama?
No, I don't.
His name is Jim Moylan.
Oh.
Yeah. And all this time he thought he was representing us. But Troy kind of let him have it, so I expect the next thing we'll see is a letter from Jim to Candid News. Then we've got Therese Tetlahi versus minors, marijuana versus the USA. Now, I know that some of my tailgaters out there are going to say, come on, Bob, let it go. Shut up, Prim. because it's another one of those where, you're just one of the few out there. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that marijuana is not anywhere near as injurious as alcohol. Everybody knows that. Everybody has tried it once in a while. Everybody knows that it was so cold in the 60s and 70s. What's different now than it was then? Everybody knows that it won't hurt you. Everybody knows that it has great medical benefits. So why does Bob keep bringing these things up when we're going to have our own local industry? And the reason is because I don't know that. And I keep running across danger signals in my show prep. And when I see something like something that's dangerous, I'm not going to say it's a duty or a responsibility. I think it's good talk radio to bring these things forward. I think it's good talk radio to give people something to think about, even if they've made up their minds. It's the essential element of critical thinking, which is the essence of Tall Tales. Okay, then I've got the House versus Brandon, Our Islands versus China, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Gurkhas there. And if I ever get there, Fisher versus Moylan, which is ancient history by now. But you all remember systemic racism. What color is the rice? Orange. That's the truth, the facts. There's just no getting around it. That rice is orange. What color does the narrative say it is? It's red rice. You leave our red rice alone. Don't you dare tell us that rice, we've been eating red rice since ever since.
How dare you?
So I use this as an analogy to compare the truth with the narrative, which comes up in almost everything we touch nowadays, giving narratives like men can have babies, women can become men, and this whole woke thing. So I'm very grateful to Jeff's Pirates Cove for being the sponsor of systemic racism. And, I had a great weekend. It was Saturday morning, I had a Spanish omelet at Jeff's. And you'll be happy to know that the chief cook out there, not the sous chef, did I pronounce that right?
You pronounced it right.
Yeah, not the sous chef, but the chief cook, the chef.
The executive.
Yeah, his name is Jose.
That's what I hear.
Yeah, and boy, if you've never had a Spanish, you owe it to yourself to have a Spanish omelet and everything on the menu is good. And if you like an adult beverage in the morning or in the afternoon or whatever, you buy a breakfast at Jeff's, one of the menu breakfasts, your coffee is free. You don't even need to pay for the coffee.
That's a bonus.
Yeah, it's a bonus, yeah. And, of course, if you're lucky, you're going to run into the pirate himself. I'm going to give me the side camera, and I'll give you a glimpse of what the old pirate actually looks like. That's him right there. That's a pretty good vision of the pirate.
Arr.
Yeah. So I asked him Saturday, I said, Jeff, what do you think of pirates? What do you think of Tall Tales? Arr. Yeah. And because Jeff does such a great job out there, I haven't even talked about the public service that Jeff renders. Jeff's is on the beach. It's a great beach out there in the windward side. And I never kept track. I don't know if Jeff even did, but hardly a year goes by that someone doesn't get outside the reef and is, a gnat's whisker from drowning when Jeff's gang doesn't go out there and rescue. And, you know what the government does for Jeff?
What do they do?
Oh, they tax the hell out of him.
Seems appropriate.
Yeah. They give him unreliable utilities.
That's consistent.
Yeah. Up until very recently, they gave him a really crappy road to his place.
That was dangerous.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone has ever taken it upon himself to do one of the BS resolutions that the legislature is so great at cranking out every time someone butchers an old pig.
Does he get a first responder's pin?
He should. Yeah, he really should. So tremendous public service, a great place to eat, good museum. I just can't say enough about it. And if you go to Jeff's, you look at the menu. Yeah, we gotta be able to show the inside one of these days, because you'll find red rice on that menu. And there's a good reason, because the reason is, given the powers vested in me as the host of Tall Tales, I have given Jeff a special dispensation to call it red rice, have a picture of it on his menu, and advertise it as red rice. Thank you, Jeff. All right, so we go on to the public law section of the card. And we keep seeing the same old stupid error. This time it's the Guam Housing Corporation. 9 items on their agenda. 6 is old business, which is the status of Lotta Gardens renovation project phase 2. 7 is new business. You want to know what new business is, Jose?
What is the new business?
Yeah, I want to know too, because they don't tell you.
Oh, shucks.
Which means any action they've taken is void. If you're gonna have new business there, you got to tell us what it is. If you don't have any new business, don't put that item in your agenda. If you can't control yourself, put new business and then under it say none. Same thing happened here at the Board of Education, and it's item 7. Maybe there's this custom item 7 has to say new business and break the open government law in the process.
I heard it failed inspection.
Probably. Okay, then we get down to Chosina by Laura M. Torres.
You know what the Hawaiian translation of chocho is? Big lips.
Big lips, huh?
I don't know if it means size or flappy, but that's the Hawaiian term. I didn't mean to stop you.
You know what I'm thinking, don't you?
Absolutely. I almost regret, but not really.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. And I'm really not conversant with anybody who could be my informant on Hawaiian language.
It's pidgin.
Okay, even worse.
Even worse.
Even worse, yeah. So, but I know some knowledgeable people that I might ask. Maybe somebody at the legislature might know. I'll ask one of the newcomers.
Who would you ask?
Maybe Ray Kanata. Yeah, okay, anyhow, back to Chosina.
Bonnie
right?
Suba says both.
Yeah, and here it goes. The title, it's the same old title, same old tired BS that we see every year on Liberation Day. And here's the title, Liberation, True or False. But this year was really one-off because she's the only one that did it. The usual suspects, the usual 3 or 4 of them, Robert Underwood and, what's her name, Lola Leon, Victoria Lola, that gang, almost have liberation. We still haven't been liberated, right? And I deliberately put this on the card as Souter versus July 21, 1944. Not too long ago, Don Farrell made a guest appearance at Jeff's and sold one of his pictorial histories of the liberation. I knew a lot about. I've been a history buff ever since probably about the 4th grade, and I've read everything I could get my hands on about Guam, Liberation Day. I thought I had a pretty good handle on it, but boy, I'll tell you what, Don's book really fleshed it out. When you it kind of helps you imagine what it must have been like on the 21st of July, 1944. You know, let's say you're some dumb 18-year-old dumb kid from Wisconsin who never even heard of Guam before, but knew his country was at war. So on, like the 8th or 9th of December, he runs down to sign up because I'm not going to let this happen. If there's anything I can do, I'm not going to let this happen. And a lot of guys with that kind of an attitude wound up in the United States Marine Corps. And on that fateful day in 1944, put yourself in this situation, Jose. You came rolling off, you came climbing down that net from the APA you were on. Occasionally guys lose their footing and fall and get killed just climbing down to the M boats. But you jump in that M boat, Higgins boat, and you're coming to shore in a hail of mortar fire and artillery, and you're damn lucky if you can even get to the place where they drop that ramp down and you go wading ashore. I've done this, but I've never heard a shot in anger. But I can tell you, it's an undertaking all by itself. So you come down that ramp and you're wading through the surf, and once again, people are getting killed all around you. Bullets, mortars, artillery, you name it. And you finally get ashore, and you know how far it is from the shore to the cliff. And you're crawling, literally crawling on your belly all the way up to the base of that cliff. And then somehow you sling your rifle over your shoulder. You're carrying your field marshalling pack on your back, which is probably 40 pounds worth of gear, and you climb up what looks like from Marine Corps Drive almost a sheer cliff. And you climb to the top of that thing, and and infantry tactics, the team that's got the high ground definitely has a super advantage, especially that kind of high ground. In the meantime, it's hotter than the hinges of hell out there, right? More than likely raining, because this was the first Liberation Day I can remember in a long time where it didn't rain. So you somehow get up to the top, and this goes on for days just to secure what was called the Fonte Plateau. It takes 4 or 5 days just to secure that plateau, all of it under hostile fire. You're not going to get much sleep. You're not going to get much to eat. And you got a really good chance to get killed. John Gerber would tell you that 1,548 Marines died in the liberation of Guam. That's a lot of guys. And, of course, most of the people that get killed are the kids. And I think I've talked about this before, but, the Air Force has got planes and bombs and stuff like that. The Navy's got ships, torpedoes, rockets, guns, etc. The Army's got soldiers. It's got its own Navy. It owns almost as many boats as the Navy does. It does all kinds of stuff, right? But when you scrape the paint and varnish off of, what has the Marine Corps got? Marines. Yeah. That's their weapon. And the strength of the Marine Corps have been those young kids between 18, 22, 23 whose cranium, whose brain housing group hasn't fully matured. So they still are not mature enough to have the understanding of how dangerous of what they're doing is. They've got this kind of age-driven recklessness that causes them to do the kinds of things that Marines need to do. And that's how they've been so successful, because the Marine Corps keeps training Marines. They take kids off the street who don't know their ear from their elbow, who don't know much of anything about anything, and they send them to, when I went through, it was 15 weeks of, let's face it, was brainwashing. And you come out of there and you think you can do damn near anything because you have had to do that.
You're rebuilt from the ground up.
Exactly. So these are the kinds of kids that came over and took this island away from the Japanese. And Cho-Cho China has to come up with stuff like, I don't mean to be a party pooper, but I think that 79 years is long enough to have looked at one side of the equation. When we celebrate the 80th July 21, let us be free to dream the impossible dream. And you know what the impossible dream for her is? Independence. It's so clear from reading what she says. She talks about, after the war, after the camp was liberated on August 10. I'm very close to someone who was liberated out there on August 10. It's my child bride. Let's take a short break, Jose.
Join us at Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro and see why they've been crowned Guam's best Chamorro food restaurant for 9 consecutive years. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus tinactac, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet burgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña location from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. for lunch, 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. for dinner, or 10 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. for their famous Sunday brunch.
Typhoon? We don't need no stinking typhoon. Instead, what we need is a typhoon recovery loan. And we have that. Up to $10,000 and an interest rate as low as 6.85%. $10,000, APR as low as 6.85. Apply in person or online at bankpacific.com. And let us be your partner in our recovery. Bank Pacific. Rosebud branches, we place roofs. Equal credit opportunity lender. Terms and conditions apply. Member FDIC.
And now back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So I'm going to pick this up at about in the middle. After liberation, Sina is part of Cho Sina, says, so gratitude turned into, gratitude turned into great latitude for securing this geographically strategic piece of real estate that is referred to as the, quote, rock. But to us is our ancestral homeland. The latitude has been fueled by thousands of Chamorro sons and daughters who have joined the U.S. military and have defended, quote, freedom, close quote. You can do a lot with those little marks called quotation marks, can't you, Jose? Their sweat and blood have become part and parcel of the fabric of the U.S. military, the instrument of American colonial policy in Guam. How can we call out the very institutions for which our own have fought for and died to be a people who have reciprocity and obligation embedded in our psyche and way of being? These contradictions are so difficult to admit and face. This is why, quote, Liberation Day, close quote, celebrations are increasingly harder for me to enjoy.
You don't say.
Well, I suspect that they're not increasingly harder for her to enjoy. I suspect it's always been hard for her to enjoy. If you're always walking around with a great big chip on your shoulder, it's hard to stand up straight and have a good time. The true liberation comes when we believe, now listen to this, the true liberation comes when we believe we can govern ourselves. Now, what does that mean to you?
Independence.
Doesn't mean what we got now, where we have we have complete rule, home rule, except for the two things that we don't want to do: take control of our tax policy and enact our own constitution.
But even there, I call it intellectual dishonesty because she knows what she's saying.
Mm-hmm.
She knows what she's saying is false on so many levels, and I can't believe that somebody who is of academia would even repeat something like that. I'm going to repeat myself again. I keep saying, if anybody wants to have full voting privileges of something, go move to where you're able to have those full voting privileges. Nobody is stopping you or preventing you from leaving Guam. Guam is the issue, not citizens.
Yep. Going on, we believe that we can, and then she says, when we believe that we can build a sustainable economy, that's going to take a while. When instead of taking, quote, handouts, so to speak, we charge rent. When we value and prioritize the Chamorro language and culture as our true identity. You can value anything you want. That's the beauty of the American system, Jose.
I don't understand who is preventing her from prioritizing the Chamorro language and her true identity. It has to be mandated by a government.
Interesting. 60 years ago when I arrived, when you went to window service for government agencies, there was almost always a sign hanging over that window that said English is the official language of Guam. Other languages will only be used for official interpretation purposes. That was a Guam law. You know how long that was on the books? 1973. It was on the books for 23 years. Who put it there? Guam legislature. Who was, until Earl Conway came along in 1970, who was the Guam legislature made up of?
Guamanians.
Guamanians, Chamorros, except for Oscar
Same
Delphin
thing, yeah.
and a couple. But I mean, it was almost every legislature was 100% Chamorros. But what difference does that make? She goes on to say, when the permanent exhibits of the Guam Museum were being developed, a group of us were tasked with naming the historical periods from an indigenous perspective to reflect the journey of the Tautau. We struggled to come up with terms with what each of the threshold moments represented as a way of naming their significance in our story as an indigenous people. The early American period covered 1898 to 1941. The transition from being Spanish-controlled to American-controlled ushered in a wave of prescriptions about doing things the American way. Referred to as the Americanization period, we named it Fa Americano, literally meaning to act American. Acting and being are two distinct forms of existence, which help to explain the phrase, you belong to, but are not part of.
Again, that's a mindset that you put, that's roadblocks and mindsets you put into yourself.
Exactly.
Nobody is stopping you from anything else. You know what being American is to me, and I know we're going on a tangent here. Being American to me is not one culture, one race. The whole point of America was immigrants and a whole bunch of people. It's almost as if they're contradicting themselves about this diversity that they always celebrate by discounting the diversity of what America is. Now, everybody right now has that mindset of America means white people. Mm-hmm. But when I grew up in America, I didn't grow up around just white people. And I experienced many different cultures in every single state I grew up in, including Hawaii, including Georgia, New York, and where else was I? In Washington State, Wisconsin. Yeah. It is not one singularity. But the way that they formulate this and with the rhetoric in here, I can see why people who've never left this island have an anger towards America, because they're being hoodwinked. They're being bamboozled.
Exactly. So, the motto of the country is E pluribus uni, from many one, because, immigrants came from all over the world to the shores of North America, and from there they spread inward. And they didn't have a common race, ethnicity, language, religion, or anything else. But up until, during my lifetime, the country stuck together very, very well. But the neo-Marxists, the cultural Marxists, have been very successful in tearing it apart.
They made it a pejorative to be an American, and I really, really resent that.
And the way they did it was that even though as diverse as the country was in every possible category, the glue that stuck everything together was the dedication to an ideal. The ideals that we find in the Bill of Rights, the ideals that we find in the Declaration of Independence, etc. And I just read a really stupid article just before the show today talking about we've got to get over America as an exceptional country. It's talking about, this country, Europe is ahead of us there, and so on, etc. Not even understanding what the phrase exceptional country means. George Washington is the one who coined it. And George Washington said, we're an exceptional country. We are embarking on a journey where we don't need kings to govern us. We're going to govern ourselves. In 1776, that was pretty, by God, exceptional. And he also said that we're going to use our exceptionality not to go and impose our system on the rest of the world, but to demonstrate by example how it's done. And then we got Cho signing. Let's take a short break, and I'll try to finish this before the Hope Cristobal show.
Always here to help you. This island is our home. Through the years, we've been a friend to the neighbors we have known. Now we're banking on the future. Services to choose. Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Hey, this is Claire Manglona from Security Title with an important warning. Wire fraud is real, and home buyers and sellers are one of the biggest targets, even on Guam. When sending money by wire transfer, be sure to confirm the wire instructions by phone, not email. In this case, it's good to be suspicious and know who you're dealing with. Let the professionals at Security Title work with you to minimize loss due to wire fraud. We are here to help.
So I picked up with this sentence: acting and being are two distinct forms of existence, which help to explain the phrase you belong to but are not part of. Now, I don't think she's familiar enough with Downs versus Bidwell to have pulled that out of that case, but that's exactly the holding in Downs versus Bidwell, that the islands acquired from Spain are property of the United States, but not part of the United States, which is something, of course, that the separatists, the separati, just love to grind away on that. But, it so often comes back to, is your thought process based on reason and your brain housing group, or your alimentary canal and emotion? And the answer to that should be, thank God we're property. Because if we were an integral part of the United States, we'd get all of the disadvantages of statehood and none of the advantages.
And that that is the discussion to have, not intermix. We are not free people. We are not full citizens, because that's malarkey, to take our our beloved
president.
Brandon's words.
Yeah.
It's the fact that she's mixing two things together, and I can see an argument saying, well, I want to have my full citizenship where I want to live on Guam, and that's fine. Do something about the island of Guam, but quit telling us that we're not free. Because I have been free since I've been born, and we've been free citizens since the Organic Act was signed.
Absolutely. So going on here, I don't mean to be a party pooper, but I think 79 years is long enough to have looked at one side of the equation. When we celebrate the 80th July 21, let us be free to dream the impossible dream. So here's my advice. I got two things that I want to pass on to Laura Sauter. You know, it's a free country. You can say, speak, write just about anything you want to, including what you've put out today. But I would appreciate it if you would not use the 21st of July as an opportunity to dance on the 1,548 Marines that got killed in chasing the Japanese out of here. You know, take your propaganda to some other venue, some other time, I guess some other place. But no, you can even do it here. But you know, have some situational awareness here. Now, consider also the people that were old enough to know what happened during the time of the Tempo Japanese and what happened afterwards. How do you think this stuff makes, you know, how is it going to sit with them? You know, you're telling them, you guys have been conned all this time. What you should have been thinking about was a real liberation, which means independence. So that's my first request. My second request is this: be upfront and honorable. Get out from behind this cover that you pull over, you and the rest of the separati, except for Bovacqua, pull over themselves saying, the indigenous people just deserve to have a choice. Which one? Well, it doesn't matter, but we need to have a choice. When really the only choice that whole gang really wants is independence. That's why they're separati. They don't want to be statehood, and they know it's impossible. And the ones who can think know that free association is a legal, if not linguistic, impossibility. So it really comes down to all of this. The way they used to do reveille in Marine Corps barracks, Jose, once upon a time, was you take a mop handle, you take the lid off an empty GI can, and you run that mop handle around the inside of the GI can. It makes quite a racket. So, Laura, you ought to have an empty GI can and a mop handle at your house. And every time you've tempted to start dancing on the graves of the Marines that liberated this island, you know, wake yourself up.
You know, there was a couple articles of Senator Kasserbauer, I forget her name.
Yeah,
Her name.
Cartman.
Carmen.
Yeah,
Andy
Mommy.
Carmen. And she said the true freedom is to free yourself with love, and it's not to depend on anybody else, and not on any other government as well. And as long as we free ourselves from this mindset that we're victims, we're prisoners, then I know that's just a pipe dream, also my impossible dream. But these are the things that gets me. And I read this, and at first my wife was like, "Jose, don't get angry." I said, I'm much less angry than I am just indignant about having to see stuff like this published in a newspaper, as if it's profound or even interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting enough for talk radio.
Yeah, well, anything that makes for good talk radio can't be all bad. But here's why you should pay particular attention here. Dr. Laura M. Sauter, Laura M. Torres Sauter, is CEO of Sauter, Betanzas and Associates, Inc., Vice Chair of Commission y Fino Chamorro. Means she's right next to Hope Cristobal at Commission. And chairperson of the Guam Indigenous Heritage Alliance. She's also an author, historian, educator and literacy advocate. You don't get to be a historian just because you like history. That is a term of art. And just because you write about things that happened in the past does not make you a historian.
She sounds like she's on her way to being a revisionist.
Yeah, if she were going to be a historian. Okay, next item on the card. What do we got? 5 minutes here before the big halftime show. And today is Hope Cristobal time. I'm just going to mention something, Jose. Last night, as I was looking at what was on TV, I noticed that the KGTF was running something on self-determination. So I tuned in on it. Have you seen it?
I've seen parts of it.
Yeah, it's a younger Hope Cristobal. Yeah.
And a quieter one.
Yeah, and one who has to open her mouth to speak instead of being able to talk with her teeth tightly clenched. But, there was, you got to have a grain of salt handy. If you watch it, you got to have a grain of salt handy because they really play fast and loose with the truth. Now, I'll give you a classic example. Hope says that self-determination, everyone in the world has a right to self-determination. Now, being one who is schooled in what's called the Hofeld correlatives, I ask, if that's the case, what is the source of that right? Because as a matter of legal reasoning, if you're going to find a right in one person, you have to find a duty or responsibility in somebody else. And I don't know where that right to self, I don't hold myself out as a great international lawyer or legal scholar, but I don't know where that right comes from, what the source of that right is. So, and then she says it's inalienable, meaning you can't sell it, you can't buy it, you can't transfer it, etc. And I don't know about that either. I understand alienability as we use that as far as real property. But anytime you enter into a personal services contract, you're alienating a little bit of your own self-determination. But the real whopper is this. She said, we were promised. We were promised. And I've heard Underwood do this too. Where was the promise? In the Treaty of Paris. And I've done it before, but I got to do it again. Article 9 of the Treaty of Paris talks about natives of the peninsula, and then it comes down to the last sentence of the treaty, Article 9 of the treaty. The civil rights and political status of the native inhabitants of the territories hereby ceded to the United States shall be determined by the Congress. That's not a promise. That's an agreement between Spain and the United States as to the status of the non-Spaniards that are subject to that treaty. Okay, let's break for the big halftime show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Donald Trump holding a wide lead in Iowa. I'm Sue Guzman, Fox News. Former President Trump is the clear leader among Republican GOP presidential candidates in 2 states. That's according to a new Fox Business poll.
The early read here on voters has former President Donald Trump as the clear frontrunner in at least 2 states right now. Trump leading by 30 points in those FBN survey of Iowa Republicans. Rounding out the top 3, though, is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who sits at 16%. Followed by South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. Scott has been climbing, though, in the Hawkeye state, which could take away some voters from Ron DeSantis. So now we go to South Carolina, where it's a similar story. Trump has a commanding lead in the Palmetto state, as almost half of the South Carolina Republican primary voters say, hey, I'll back the former president, and believe he has what it takes to beat out President Biden.
Fox's Alexis McAdams. UPS and its workers are getting closer to what could be a crippling strike for the U.S. economy.
About 340,000 UPS workers represented by the Teamsters may walk off the job August 1st. The union holding rallies to build support in cities like Philly, San Francisco, and in Atlanta Saturday.
I want to strike. I want to prove to the UPS that we are worthy. If you got to strike to get it, then you strike to get it, but you fight for what you want.
The company said last week, we are prepared to increase our industry-leading pay and benefits, but need to work quickly to finalize a fair deal. The union's been saying the company has to come up with more pay for experienced part-time workers who often make less than new hires. UPS usually handles about 20 million packages a day. Jill Nato, Fox News.
And a nearly week-long wildfire in the Greek island of Rhodes, forcing thousands of tourists and locals to evacuate. The region popular for its beaches and ancient ruins. America's listening to Fox News.
Typhoon? We don't need no stinking typhoon. Instead, what we need is a typhoon recovery loan. And we have that. Up to $10,000 and an interest rate as low as 6.85%. $10,000, APR as low as 6.85. Apply in person or online at bankpacific.com. And let us be your partner in our recovery. Bank Pacific. Rosebud branches, replace roofs. Equal credit opportunity lender. Terms and conditions apply. Member FDIC.
Half a day. This is Claire Manglona from Security Title with an important warning. Wire fraud is real, and home buyers and sellers are one of the biggest targets, even on Guam. When sending money by wire transfer, be sure to confirm the wire instructions by phone, not email. In this case, it's good to be suspicious and know who you're dealing with. Let the professionals at Security Title work with you to minimize loss due to wire fraud. We are here to help.
Police in Miami, Florida, investigating a possible armed robbery on a yacht in the Miami River Sunday night. WSVN's Elitza Bisios reports.
It started around 9 o'clock. Police going onto this yacht with long guns out, people with their hands up. The owners of this big boat telling us that apparently they had it chartered today. There were about 13 to 17 people on board. They did pay, but when it came time to finish the charter, they apparently held up the captain at gunpoint, saying they wanted their money back. And apparently it was another crew member who was able to secretly text for help.
The owner of the boat says no one was hurt in the incident. More changes coming to Twitter, including a new name, logo, and more. Fox's Christina Coleman.
There's been a number of changes since Musk took over. They include Twitter laying off 3/4 of its workforce to cut costs and naming a new CEO. Also earlier this month, Musk announced new restrictions for Twitter, capping the number of tweets users can view on a daily basis to try and prevent unauthorized scraping of valuable data. That move got some pushback from users. So we'll see what happens next. Will Twitter's famous logo change? We might be saying bye-bye birdie soon as tomorrow.
At least 10 people are dead. One is still trapped after the collapse of a gymnasium roof in a middle school in China Sunday. Chinese state media saying 19 people were in the gym when that happened. 4 escaped. Rescue efforts are continuing. A preliminary investigation suggesting that the collapse may have been caused by misplaced construction material. And at least 15 are dead. 19 others missing after a ferry capsized off the coast of Indonesia. The boat was reportedly overloaded with 40 people on board. The wooden boat, they say, was designed for 20. 6 people were rescued, and rescuers are continuing to search for those that remain missing. I'm Sue Guzman. This is Fox News.
Join us at Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro and see why they've been crowned Guam's best Chamorro food restaurant for 9 consecutive years. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus tinactac, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet burgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagatnya location from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. for lunch, 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. for dinner, or 10 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. for their famous Sunday brunch.
Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
When traveling, people frequently ask, what's it like living in Guam?
I told them a lot of things, but what always stands out is that when a catastrophe hits, we don't go breaking windows and looting stores.
We knock on our neighbors' doors and ask if they're okay.
And that's what we've seen since Mawar.
Yes, it has not always been easy, but we as a community have joined together to assist in our recovery.
So Bank Pacific thanks all who are repairing Guam.
All of us.
So when people ask, I tell them Guam is good.
Bank Pacific, member FDIC.
So one of the new additions there to Tall Tales is, there it is. Yeah, one of the new additions to Tall Tales is me with a shake and howdy with Mayor Chargaloff of Inalahan. I saw him at the block party on Saturday, and I had to pat him on the back and tell him that, you know, he's one of my heroes because he's doing a great job down there in Inalahan. I would like to entice him to run for mayor of Jigo because we could really use his help, couldn't we, Jose?
Oh, that's so true.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we could run the Hope Cristobal show tomorrow. We got a technical difficulty today, but we'll get it back up soon. You can bet on that. It's too important to let go. Okay. Talking about the culture, next I've got Bavakwa versus the culture. And it's an article that ran in the PDN, and it says, HITA talk features cultural immersion experience. Now, I don't know how much more of a cultural immersion a person could have than living here on the island of Guam. Because Guam is the epicenter of the Chamorro culture. So if you want to know what the Chamorro culture is like, stick your head out the window because you're right smack dab in the middle of it. Now, I can hear the guy over there in the lazy bed. Oh, hey, titongo cultura, and stumbling Chamorro. Well, maybe. But a culture is the way people organize their lives, not the way they did it 50 years ago or 100 years ago. It's now.
There is a period of time, believe it or not, people, where there are Chamorros who would look at a laddie stone and say, "Ooh, that's not Chamorro," because they came before the laddie stone.
Uh-huh.
And that's where we have to go. Are we what part of the century or what part of the timeline you wanted to practice? You know, what is it that you're saying culture is?
Yeah, and what it is what we're practicing now, today. Now, it includes our memories, folkways, mores, understanding of history, etc., but that's not culture. And you'll see that what I'm talking about when I get into this. I don't know what the acronym HITA stands for, because the article doesn't tell me. Oh, it's Heritage, Ideas, Traditions, Arts. Heritage, Ideas, Traditions, Arts.
Oh, so it's a Chamorro name?
It's a Chamorro word, yeah.
But an English acronym.
Yeah, but an English acronym. And HITA stands for we. In Chamorro, there are two different we's. There's we inclusive and we exclusive. So if I say, yeah, my wife really wants to go to the movies tonight, we're going to the movies, we would use hame, which is, it doesn't mean you're not coming with us, see. But if I said, Jose, if you really want to see that movie, we can go tonight. That's HITA. So it's a nice, it's clever, but so obvious that as part of the, and this is part of the culture. You know, you go back and forth, you use each language, and you make up an acronym of English words, and the acronym has a meaning in Chamorro. That's probably more the essence of what Bavacqua wants to talk about than his article. So it goes like this: a Chamorro language and cultural immersion program for adults is the subject of a HITA talk called Planting the Seeds from 10 until noon Saturday at the Guam Museum Theater. Last year, the museum and Chief Hurrah Academy collaborated to create a pilot Chamorro language immersion program for adults. Now, this is what it means, what an immersion program means. During the time that you're in the program, you do not use your mother tongue at all. You use only the target language. So if Chamorro is not your mother tongue, the whole time in that program, you use only Chamorro, which means if you can't say it in Chamorro, you ain't going to get it. You quickly learn when you visit Samoa that if you can't say Fia ino pia, you might not get a cold drink in some of the places. Or if you're driving in rural Mexico, when you pull into a little roadside counter that sells beer, you better know how to say, yo quiero cerveza, por favor. Or you might not even get a glass of water. And that's the theory of culture, of a Chamorro language immersion program for adults. And there's no question about it, it's very, very effective, but of course it's extremely resource intensive. So resource intensive that probably, except on a very limited basis, it's impractical. Impractical and impracticable. And I think the method that of spreading Chamorro that I've described on the show, although not as effective, is a whole lot more practicable and practical. Now, when it comes to Chamorro cultural immersion, we're there right now. This is it. I've been in a Chamorro culture immersion program For 60 years. It'll be, I think, like August 24, Jose. It'll mark 60 years I've been in this immersion program, right?
Congratulations.
Yeah, and I'm still here. Okay, now the program had 17 participants joining for a 2-week language and cultural immersion experience in Guam. This year, the Guam Museum is sponsoring a second program that will once again mix classroom learning with cultural activities in the community. The idea for this program came from students who were attending Michael Bavacqua's free weekly Chamorro language classes held via Zoom, who were hoping to create more resources for those wanting to level up or enhance their learning of their native tongue. 2 of the participants from last year's pilot program, June Pangilinan and Clarissa Mendiola, have returned to coordinate and organize the second year of the program. For this year's immersion program, 2 of the participants live in Guam, 2 Saipan, and they currently reside in the Chamorro diaspora across the United States. This year's participants range from 19 to 67. Oh, they're taking in nothing but young folks. And some know a few words of their native language. Well, if they only know a few words, how can it be their native language? It's because of the narrative, right?
Stop speaking truth.
This is all narrative. During the program's 2 weeks, they will participate in, here we go. Here's the Chamorro culture, Jose. They will participate in weaving, chanting, and dance workshops, and also hear presentations about Chamorro history and culture by masters and experts. So it would be nice to learn about weaving and chanting and dance workshops, but is that Chamorro culture? How many people do much weaving and chanting today? They used to do it once upon a time.
Unless they're speaking of the roads, I don't do much weaving.
Yeah. Now, this kind of reminds me of my youth, say back in the 40s, before I was 10 years old. We used to go out to Uncle Harry's farm, the guy that had the crank-up phone. And Uncle and Harry, Grandma Piper lived with Uncle Harry and Aunt Ines. Grandma Piper was Ines's mother. And they would be out on the front porch of the house every night washing eggs. They had a lot of poultry. They'd go out and gather the eggs, and then at night they'd sit there and wash those eggs and put them in egg cartons. They probably spent 2 or 3 hours every night. Was that part of the culture? Probably for a lot of farmers in the 1940s, right? So the next time I go back to my hometown, Jose, I'm going to start a cultural immersion program. And I'm going to teach people how to walk. Well, I'm going to have to learn myself. Teach them how to do that, because it's an important part of is it?
Do you think sometimes when people say culture, they mean tradition?
Well, and even then, tradition, I'll give you a really good example of tradition. If you were back in my hometown and say I gave you the address of somebody to visit, and you went and visit, you ring the doorbell, they open the door, you start taking off your shoes, they'd say, do you want to come? Is something wrong with your shoes? You don't take off your shoes. You go in the house. You take off your shoes maybe when you're sitting down and watching TV at 9 o'clock because it's more comfortable. Totally different here, right? So that would be tradition. And that certainly is part of the culture. It has been, I don't know how long. I don't know if it's something we picked up from the Japanese or something in place before that. But I have been to the Philippines and out into the what's the word I'm looking for? I would say boonies here, but there's a better word there. I don't know. I can't remember it. And a family took us as guests into their nipa hut. You know, it's all bamboo, coconut fronds. The floor is made out of split bamboo, which they polish to a high sheen with coconut husks. And there's a space between the bamboo pieces, so whatever gets on the floor falls through it. But you wouldn't want to wear your shoes in there, not on a bed, you know, even if. So, you know, that's certainly tradition. Something I've noticed here myself is that it's very difficult for someone who is a traditional Chamorro to eat if other people are present that aren't eating. It may even be almost a gastrical, physical impossibility, as people just don't want to. So, of course, the custom is that if you arrive at somebody's house at mealtime, hey, come on, boy, go eat, boca, boca, boca. And if you say, you never want to say, hey, dispense it, oh, what, he doesn't like our food. So you better eat, if not for yourself, but so they can eat. These are traditions and customs and things like that, right? But the way people weave purses, you know, way back in the old days, that's a historical artifact, and it's worth knowing. But don't kid yourself that you're learning the Chamorro culture with that. I am aware of no history whatsoever, no authentic history that said that pre-Hispanic days people here engaged in these chants. It's just something that's made up and new. And the same way with the dancing, which, you know, according to what I know, all started about 1979 when Frank Rabone combined Samoan, Maori, Tahitian, and Hawaiian music and dances, so we'd have something to do here. But if there is some authentic historical underpinnings, I'd like to know about it. So for this heated talk, the immersion participants will talk about their experiences over the past few weeks, not just increasing their Chamorro fluency, but also reconnecting to their culture. Yeah. Now I see this as a form of gaslighting. You know, it's to pull these folks over here. Forget about Levi's and and all of these Fa America. You know, when I started teaching, you know, in the early '60s, if you'd have told the kids then that they'd have to dress up in the costumes that the so-called dancers wear now, they'd have laughed you right out of the room. So that's the point I wanted to make on this whole culture thing. Is it a worthwhile undertaking to learn Fino Chamorro? Absolutely. Whether you are an indigenous Chamorro, a paleface from the mainland, anytime you can learn another language, it's very well worthwhile and a good idea. And certainly if you're born and raised here, yeah, it's a good idea. And I would encourage that as much as I can. I point out that we're going at it in such a manner that I don't think anyone ever learns in these school programs. Talking from the kids I've talked to, they learn about basket weaving and some of this other stuff. But when it's culture, if you're really talking culture, it's the language. If you don't understand that, your understanding of the culture is minimal, except to the extent that I mentioned this total immersion that we're in right now. I've got a couple of folks up here in the green room. Let's see, I've got another Joe and Dr. Ron McNinch. So, todo y dos na debiti ta cuento si fino English, ti fino Chamorro Sa te tungo fino tomorrow, say Ron McNints. Go for it, another Joe.
I can't say I'm fluent in tomorrow, Bob.
Yeah, tungo fino tomorrow, John. O sa kada dia lo dispensa jo sa appling tomorrow lo malaknya te taja nai.
I know a little bit, but not very much. But the reason I call him kebab is because there are different, for understanding, there are different Chamorro dialects. And it ain't, going back a few decades, they would make a big issue about how the Chamorros in the South would express their phrases, which would be different from the Chamorros in the central and northern part of Guam. And I just didn't I didn't really bother to pay attention to it, but they did warn, okay, be careful how you say, if you ever, say these words, these phrases, be careful how you say it in say, the South. But and then I was aware that people from CNMI might speak a little bit different as well. But I think what it is it's a very Americanized attitude on kebab is the right to complain is what it is. So they want the ability to be the authority, hence they establish their own Chamorro language authority, I forget what they call it. And therefore, after a while, they'll maintain the standard and they'll be able to complain about everyone else who doesn't. So, it's very American, very American. It's just not a bad thing. But what I'm kind of curious about is the standard they're going to hold because, for example, from the start of kebab, low-hanging fruit, the village of Tamuning. That's not a Chamorro word. And so it's really just everything white is bad. Just seems like an kebab. But what do you think? Does it sound
well, Tamuning is a corruption of a word that came from Sonsorol. It's my understanding. The folks who are called Carolinians in the Northern Marianas, or maybe Palau, had a pretty large gathering there, and it was more like Tamunuk than Tamuning. But so it's not a Chamorro word. So what? And in my part of the country, there's a town called Maquanago. Certainly not an English word. And this is the story I tell about it, remembering this is Tall Tales. But a couple of French fur traders were traveling down the Fox River, and they came to Phantom Lake, and they beached their canoes, and they ran into a couple of Native Americans. And one of the fur traders said in French to the Indian, what's the name of this place? And, of course, the Native American couldn't understand. So he said to the other Native American, Maquanago. And the fur trader said, oh, okay, it's Maquanago. It's been called Maquanago ever since. The word Maquanago in that Native American language means, what did he say?
There's interpretation. Yeah. And up until a few years ago, I don't know, a few years ago or decades, the French made it a big issue about everything that's English in the region, they have to delete it from their vocabulary. I don't know if you remember that in the news.
Well, the French are very proud of Francais, and they do have a French academy, and they do rule on use and spelling of the French language. I don't know of any other country that does. Of course, we have our own Chamorro Language Commission here, presided over by old Chris Hobel with the help of the SINA. But languages are not static and they're not proprietary. So you mentioned different dialects. You talk to somebody from, when I was growing up, you talk to somebody from Milwaukee, they sounded totally different than somebody from my hometown 40 miles away. That's just a natural phenomenon. But what we do is we think that some dialects are more high class than others. For instance, in the UK, it's Oxford English. If you please, and don't bother me with some sort of Cockney dialect.
Yeah. Yeah, Cabal, it'll be very interesting to see how all this plays out. But anyway, thanks for your time, Cabal. Let's keep listening.
Okay, always good to talk to you another, Joe. We're going to go to Wrigley Field, and then we're going to come back to Ron McNinch.
BK's turning up the heat with the new fiery chicken nuggets. Our all-white meat chicken nuggets, cooked golden brown and coated with a spicy glaze made from black pepper, bird's eye chili, and a touch of cayenne pepper. Available in an 8-piece combo meal. Top off your meal with our new Kickin' Mango frozen drinks with a sizzle of chili. BK's fiery chicken nuggets and Kickin' Mango frozen drink. Now available for a limited time only at participating locations. BK, you rule.
Okay, so here we are in Wrigley Field, and I noticed that Ron McNinch has been sitting here watching the game very carefully. He's got a scorecard in his hand. He's probably keeping score, which is what people used to do when they went to the baseball game. They would, that special shorthand you use to keep score in baseball. Who's ahead, Ron?
Hey, Huffaday Senator, Huffaday Guam. You know...
hey, Ron, who's ahead?
Yeah, I think you are.
You're supposed to say the Cubs. Wrigley Field?
Yes, yes. You know, they finally won the World Series, so I thought that was an accomplishment.
For them it was, yeah. But if you're a real Cub fan, it didn't make any difference if they won or lost. They were still the Cubs. So you wanted to talk about culture?
Oh, yeah. I wanted to mention a couple of quick things about culture. First, I got the great opportunity on Sunday to go down to Jeff's Pirates Cove and talk to Don Farrell for about 15 or 20 minutes. And I loved the book that he produced on Tinian and the atomic bomb. Just very well done. Lots of pictures. Really just a nice read overall. And so I quite enjoyed saying hi to him. I'm going to the Marianas History Conference in early September and to talk about Guy Gavaldon and how Private Gavaldon walked out 1,500 combatants and women and children in Saipan in World War II. And he knew Guy Gavaldon fairly well. And so it's a really neat bit of history, a hidden piece of history, I think. I was going to mention, and I don't want to sound negative when I say this, but I like you, I've read the history fairly well for Guam. What was the reason that the United States, after taking Saipan and Tinian, which were their primary military objectives, why did they retake Guam? There wasn't a military purpose to retaking Guam.
You don't think so?
No. I think that the United States felt a deep obligation to come back for the civilians that were here. In fact, if you read some of the histories, there was a debate. Should we retake it or not? And there was an obligation to do so. It was much more than it wasn't a heavy military objective to retake Guam. It was an obligation to the U.S. nationals that had been here, and that the United States knew were suffering here.
Very interesting. I'm not familiar with the history you're talking about. I'd like to be. Not knowing anything about it, I would say that the last thing that the Americans would want would be hostile aircraft 100 miles away from the place that they're going to be launching B-29s.
Right, but by the time of the 44 invasion, outside of having an isolated physical garrison here, and you're right, there was an airfield here. There wasn't it wasn't the kind of threat that was as heavy as some of the others. And there's a couple other quick things I wanted to mention, and that is, with languages, you have to be really careful about tinkering with the language. And we've talked about this before. Guam should be very careful about tinkering with the spelling of words, the pronunciation of words, the words that are used in the Chamorro language, particularly by our elders, because they can help to teach our young people. And you have to be really careful when those kinds of things are kind of tinkered around with. In fact, in Saipan, people actively speak Chamorro without, and they don't interrupt each other with English. That is, on Guam, for some reason, every time I hear people speak Chamorro, they'll interrupt each other, saying, "Oh, you didn't pronounce this right," or "You didn't pronounce that right," and they don't allow each other to have a conversation that's unimpeded. And I think immersion programs are good when you learn a language, but that habit of interrupting each other has to be overcome, I think.
Well, when it comes to an orthography, I think that the Chamorro Language Commission committed a great disservice with this screwed up orthography that they've come up with, where they think that an apostrophe is a phoneme. You've got two sounds that are represented by two letters. That would be ch and ng, and some of the other things that they've done, especially when we started out with a Spanish orthography, which is a really nice piece of work. So if we're going to be consistent, if the Language Commission is going to be consistent, we ought to go through and respell most of the Spanish-derived names because they don't fit the orthography. Once again, I see this whole new orthography thing as a form of gaslighting us into what Sina would call nation building. How can you have nation building if you don't have your own language? How can you have your own language if you don't have this semi-exotic orthography?
Right. And, the interesting thing is, I call it the Spanish bridge, because the Chamorro language, as it was traditionally spoken, has a similarity to the Spanish language. That's to the advantage of the Chamorro language, because it gives it a kind of congruent reference point. Because otherwise, the Chamorro language is almost in isolation without it. And so, I think that there's some food for thought on those things. Hey, Sandra, I always love your show.
Okay, Ron, good talking to you.
All right, thank you, sir.
Yeah, the Chamorro language and the Spanish language. Chamorro is to Spanish what English is, say, to not even to Latin. So there are Spanish loanwords in Chamorro, but the grammar is not even recognizable by anyone who speaks Spanish. There is no estar and ser in Spanish. In Chamorro. There's no verb to be. And Chamorro, and the whole idea of tenses is handled totally different. It's things like infixes, prefixes, and duplication and reduplication of syllables. So if the fact that you know Spanish is not going to help you at all if you want to try to learn Chamorro. The way to learn Chamorro is to listen, repeat, and have somebody who will help you so that as you repeat, you come closer and closer to how the language sounds. Okay, I notice I've got a full keyboard here, so I better shut up before I go to the next item on the card and answer the phone for a little while. I've got repeat on G, if you know tomorrow, drive-through Jack, and Dr. Poole wants to talk about Dr. Ron McNinch. Some kind of a medical conference, no doubt, all those doctors, right? Repite, por favor, Gatson.
Senor. Just a couple of points about what Dr. McNinch talked about. In Saipan, whenever I go there, and I also participate on a Saturday morning radio show that's spoken in Chamorro, I notice that a lot of the Saipan people infuse English words into when they speak Chamorro, much more so than the Chamorros on Guam. And I asked some of the people up there, why do you do that? And it's to them, because they weren't always part of the American family, it was to them, to show that their way of showing that they fully accepted being American. And so now, even if there's a word in Chamorro that exists for something, they will mix in an English word into their speech just to show that, hey, we are, very accepting of the Americans. And so that's an interesting thing that I've observed. And then the other thing about the orthography, I do agree that it's kind of wanky or wonky, but the reason why it's important to have a one symbol, one sound system is because very subtle intonations in the Chamorro language can change a word to an entirely different meaning, like malago versus malagu, right? That's one is want and the other one is run, or gata versus gata. One is catch and one is step on. So that's why you see people or hear people correcting each other, because you don't want them to continue saying something incorrectly.
The idea of one word, one sound is called grapheme-phoneme correspondence.
Right.
And Spanish perhaps has the highest degree of grapheme-phoneme correspondence of any language I've ever heard of. You see a Spanish word, and they do it with a few diacritical marks. On the other side, you have English, which has probably the worst grapheme-phoneme correspondence of any world language. But people learn it and speak it and pronounce it correctly. So I think for somebody who's trying to learn a language, throwing something with a lot of diacritical marks at them tends to be more confusing than helpful. But I see your point, Pete.
Right, and then the last thing, about why the U.S. took Guam back, I think it's well settled that Guam was the most important, is the most important, and for the more foreseeable future, the most important piece of property in Micronesia.
Yeah, but that wouldn't have a combat consequence. If you figure, you're bombing Japan from Tinian and Saipan, you're going to win the war. And you're going to win the war, you're going to get Guam back, even if you never have to fire a shot in anger there. So that doesn't, I don't think that takes away from Ron's point. It's a very interesting point. I'd like to flesh it out a little bit more, if you see what I mean.
I see. All right, thank you for the time. I'll wait. I want to hear what Dr. Poole says.
Okay. So go ahead, Pete. One more thing about, languages and new things. There are a couple of different ways that languages develop words to describe new things. English likes to borrow words from other languages. So when that one-eyed monster appeared in people's living rooms in the beginning of the 50s, we borrowed a Latin word and a Greek word and called it television, right? The Germans, on the other hand, are more comfortable with something called circumlocution, which means they don't assign a name to it like we do. they tell you what it does. So the German translation of the word for television comes out more like this: long distance picture transmission. You see the difference?
That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
I would want to drink a beer at night after speaking German all day.
So tomorrow, you just take the word from the language of the people that brought it in, and that's why, there are a couple of ways to say refrigerator in Chamorro. One of them is Icebox. Polo Estigi Icebox.
Again, I don't know the language, but I've heard many different ways to speak Chamorro, like Chamorro the way the Germans do, the
circumlocution.
Locution, like the word flower wasn't flora, or how they say it.
Floris.
It was actually the laughter of the petals, or the laughter of the plant, something like that. It was more descriptive.
Much prettier. Okay, I got Drive-Through Jack. I'm going to pick up Drive-Through Jack right after Churchill Downs, and then the finale today is going to be Dr. Poole talking about Dr. McNinch. So I know nobody's going to tune out before that comes up in the air.
Join us at Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro and see why they've been crowned Guam's best Chamorro food restaurant for 9 consecutive years. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus tinactac, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet burgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagatnya location from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. for lunch, 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. for dinner, or 10 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. for their famous Sunday brunch.
Half a day. This is Clara Manglona from Security Title with an important warning. Wire fraud is real, and home buyers and sellers are one of the biggest targets, even on Guam. When sending money by wire transfer, be sure to confirm the wire instructions by phone, not email. In this case, it's good to be suspicious and know who you're dealing with. Let the professionals at Security Title work with you to minimize loss due to wire fraud. We are here to help.
Churchill Downs, Wrigley, as you were, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky, the home stretch. 6 furlongs. I cross the finish line, finish another exciting, elucidating, educational episode of Tall Tales. But right now, I'm going to find out what fast food joint Drive-Through Jack is calling us from. Is it McDonald's today, Jack?
No, tonight, actually, I'm going to have my supper at home. So, yeah, it's been a little bit muggy weather, and I just want to make something very simple. Just sending for myself tonight, but if it was for other people, I would pick something up. But anyways, I wanted to call. I'm just listening now on the radio. I usually listen to TuneIn app, but somehow I think you guys having problems with TuneIn, so I haven't been able to listen. But I caught the language thing, and it's pretty sad. I think that when I was growing up, they said that Chamorro isn't a written language; it's a spoken language. And if you want to learn Chamorro the proper way, you need to listen with your ears and convert.
Jack, I got to interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
No language is a written language, except maybe what you stick into a computer.
True.
Languages, by definition, are spoken. But go ahead.
Yeah. So it's an oral. What I meant is an oral traditional language, and that's how I learned it. I learned it by going to mass, going to rosaries, and when I first became familiar with Latin, I got a little bit confused because I thought maybe Chamorro was like Latin, a dead language. But my instructor informed me. He says, no, Chamorro is not a dead language because it's constantly changing. Unlike Latin. Latin doesn't conform to modernity.
And that's the beauty of it.
And so you have this problem with what's going on with the language right now. I mean, you, I, whatever. it doesn't really make much sense because it seems that everything's Romanized. In other words, used by the 26 alphabets, and Romanization isn't really, like I think you mentioned this before, a great way to learn a foreign language.
But Jack, there are only 24 letters in the Chamorro orthography that Hope and the game put together.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, I learned it through speaking and pictures and music and prayers and mass. And I think we've escaped from that, or we moved away from that. And I don't know, the language doesn't make much more sense to me. And I do agree that the Saipanese and the CMI and the Carolinians, they speak it better, if not more, I guess, flowery or more palatable to listen to the ears. But I also wanted to comment a little bit about the predicament of revisiting history and revising it. Down at the Aston War Memorial, you could pick up these little micro manuscripts that were written back in the 1950s, 1960s, detailing the recapture of Guam. The books are not called The Liberation of Guam. It's not called The Conquering of Guam. It's not called the recolonization of Guam. It's called The Recapture of Guam. And I think, in military history does play a part on how we view our past. And it's an important part. And it's pretty dry, but it stands out to the sacrifices that the people made. And, we're not trying to be I'm not trying to be emotional about it, but, to revisit that time of World War II, it's really hurtful for those that still are alive, both on all sides, and even the innocents. And, someday, I think we'll heal from this, but I don't think we're going to heal from it when we constantly look back and try to, reinvent our history. But that's what I have to say about that. And I'm glad that we came out of this typhoon better off than we went into it, I think. I think there's a lot of holes that have been exposed, and I think that we're going to be better for it. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, Drive-Through Jack. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. So long. Okay, next we've got Dr. Tom Poole, who wants to talk about Dr. Ron McNinch. A diagnosis coming up, Tom?
Yes, sir. I think Dr. McNinch was exactly correct. And I have read about the arguments for and against actually, reoccupying Guam and reoccupying the Philippines. As you know, we had that island hopping, leapfrogging strategy where we would isolate strongholds and not invade them because we could completely isolate them with submarines and carrier aircraft, so they really couldn't do anything from those islands. And that's exactly what they wanted to do with the Philippines. As I'm sure you know, General MacArthur felt very strongly that he made a promise that he would return. And even though Admiral Nimitz and all of the thinkers were against it because the Philippines was so heavily fortified, he won in his argument to Roosevelt, and we left, 13,000 dead Americans there in the Philippines, arguably unnecessarily.
And a lot of dead Americans on Peleliu also. Did you know that, Tom?
Yes, I certainly did.
Yeah.
And Guam fell into that same category, that we could completely sterilize Guam without having to occupy it. And I think Dr. McNinch is exactly correct. The reason that we invaded Guam and the reason that we left over 1,000 dead, Marines and soldiers here was just as he said. It was for emotional reasons rather than grand strategy. So I think his point is excellent.
That's good. I'm glad you chimed in on that one. That's a feel-good point as far as I'm concerned.
And I also want to second. I also picked up a copy of the book by Dan Farrell on Tinian. I just got it yesterday, and I agree with him. It's excellent. I'm looking forward to finishing it.
Yeah, Don really turns out some good product.
I agree. I absolutely agree. To have someone like that local to all of us, I mean, Saipan specifically, but really an amazing resource.
Yeah. Well, thanks again.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Tom. It's been a while since we've heard the dulcet tones of your voice.
Yes, I've been traveling quite a bit, but I'm home now. Thank you, Judge. Talk to you soon.
So long. Yeah.
You know, Bob, on sticking with the language and Chamorro language, I've always heard that up in Saipan, down here we have Spanish and Chamorro intertwined with Spanish. Up in Saipan and Tinian and Rota, is there Japanese intertwined with the Chamorro?
Yeah, there's some Japanese
And
words.
do they differentiate between, that's, you know how they say that's Fino Espanol, this is Fino Chamorro?
Well, in Chamorro, you talk about Spanish language as Fino Español.
Español there.
No, not Español. Español.
Oh, Español.
Español. And I think for Japanese, Fino Japanese. Japanese. It's a little hard to say, yeah. Okay, so an interesting couple of calls here, Tom. That's a very interesting, and it makes a lot of sense that if the ability for the Japanese to launch an attack from Guam was over, then it didn't make sense militarily to invade it, because we had the airfields in Tinian and Saipan. And that, you know, the day that Saipan fell, the Tojo cabinet resigned because they knew it was over.
What kind of documentation would we find? Would there be military orders? Would there be diaries of commanders?
Something
things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I want to say that Mr. Farrell spoke a little bit about that on Ray's show, that he was searching for those reasons why they came back to Guam, but he hasn't found those since or hasn't gone deeper into that, but that would be very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, one more thing here on what we've been talking about. Harvey Egna chimes in and reminds me something that that I don't usually talk about very much. There were two different Marine Corps organizations that were involved in the reoccupation of the 1st Provisional Brigade and the 3rd Marine Division. And there was another military organization involved too. It was called the 77th Division of the United States Army. They were part of the liberation. But it's kind of like, Harry Truman's definition of Marines. He said, those Marines have one more member in a rifle squad than the Army does. Because they got to have all those riflemen, and they got to have a PR man, too. Yeah. But there was a division of soldiers here that fought well.
And classically, I think if people want to have an idea of what it was like to storm the beaches, is to watch that movie Saving Private Ryan. I think that was a great depiction of a cliff, and a beach under fire.
Really. Okay, just about time for me to say goodbye. I guess while I'm waiting for the magic hour to say goodbye to our president, we ought to probably say goodbye to Jeff, too, out there at Pirates Cove. And just a friendly reminder, Jeff's is open tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. That's a great place to go if you got a little extra time to spend in a beautiful place, good food, good drinks, etc. Jeff's Pirates Cove. Is it time, Jose? All right. Let's go, Brandon.
The Point is KUSG, Hagatna, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Donald Trump holding a wide lead in Iowa. I'm Sue Guzman, Fox News. Former President Trump is the clear leader among Republican GOP presidential candidates in 2 states, according to a new Fox Business poll.
The early read here on voters has former President Donald Trump as the clear frontrunner in at least 2 states right now. Trump leading by 30 points in those FBN survey of Iowa Republicans. Rounding out the top 3, though, is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who sits at 16%. Followed by South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. Scott has been climbing, though, in the Hawkeye state, which could take away some voters from Ron DeSantis. So now we go to South Carolina, where it's a similar story. Trump has a commanding lead in the Palmetto state, as almost half of the South Carolina Republican primary voters say, hey, I'll back the former president, and believe he has what it takes to beat out President Biden.
Fox's Alexis McAdams. UPS and its workers getting closer to what could be a crippling strike for the U.S. economy.
About 340,000 UPS workers represented by the Teamsters may walk off the job August 1st. The union holding rallies to build support in cities like Philly, San Francisco, and in Atlanta Saturday.
I want to strike. I want to prove to the UPS that we are worthy. If you got to strike to get it, then you strike to get it, but you fight for what you want.
The company said last week, we are prepared to increase our industry-leading pay and benefits, but need to work quickly to finalize a fair deal. The union's been saying the company has to come up with more pay for experienced part-time workers who often make less than new hires. UPS